All right. Of course, today is the review for the midterm, and then Thursday is the actual midterm. Regular time, 2 o'clock to 3:15, March 5th. Same location. Nope. Where are we? 19? 19, I think. Same room wherever this is. It's 75 points. There are 25 questions, so roughly 3 points each. That translates to about 5% of your grade. As I said in the very beginning of this course, it is heavily based on, assessment is heavily based on your assignments, your design document, the actual correctness of your stuff, the execution of the stuff that you have much more control over rather than one shot test. I would call that summative assessment or summative or formative. Yeah, summative assessment. Basically high stakes, and I like to reduce that down to as much as possible. In fact, I'd be okay with getting rid of exams entirely within this course. But at least for this semester, we still have a midterm and a final. The final is also worth 5% of your grade. But it is open book, open note, and required computer. Again, it's going to be a Scantron. It's not going to be on the computer. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be like this example here that we're going to be doing. I'm going to give you a URL. You'll be able to get this electronically, and then physically, I will provide a Scantron sheet. That is just a regular old bubble sheet. So you will need a number 2 pencil. Bring a number 2 pencil with you. And again, the only reason that I'm doing that old school Scantron bubble sheet is the testing center does not allow open book, open note, open computer exams. So a good trade-off in my opinion. We'll go ahead and continue doing it on Scantron. But I will not hand out physical copies. Now I'm putting required here because if you bring your computer, of course, then you can use those electronic copies. But if you don't have a computer or your computer craps out the day of, I will have a limited number of hard copies available if you absolutely need them. Bring scratch paper if you want. Somebody asked in the other section, can we do everything in Eclipse or IDEs? Yes, absolutely, if you want to. They are multiple choice questions, so there are going to be answers there. You have to just choose the best one. It will cover basic Java, object-oriented programming, and object-oriented programming in the context of Java. SQL, select basic CRUD, create, retrieve, update, and destroy, as well as database design. Right? Here is the midterm from spring 19. But first, are there any questions about the format of the exam? No? Okay. Here's the actual exam from spring 19. I did both the main section and the honor section one year ago here. Let me go ahead and zoom in so we can see this a little bit better. There we go. Too much. All right, there we go. Resolution was better in the other room. So here's a piece of Java code. Obviously, we're creating a new integer array. This is a regular plain old array, not a dynamic data structure. But the question is, once we're done using the array, ARR, to free up memory, we would. Well, we don't. Java automatically handles its own memory management. B, we call the free method system.free of array. We use the old keyword. Array is equal to old int, or we set the array equal to 0. So what's the answer? A. We don't do our own memory management in Java. We let the Java virtual machine take care of that for us. There is indeed no free method. There is a GC method, which stands for garbage collection. You can try to invoke it, but there's no guarantee that it'll actually run. If the Java virtual machine determines that it would cost more to run garbage collection than it would be saving memory, it won't do it, even if you tell it to. So it has some very smart algorithms under the hood that will say, nah, I don't feel like it. Right? There is obviously no old keyword. Setting the array to 0, that would end up being a compiler error because you would not be able to set a reference to an integer here. Right? In Java, you can use interfaces and abstract classes. What is the difference between these two? You can create instances of an interface, but not abstract classes. You can create instances of an abstract class, but not interfaces. An abstract class must implement an interface, or you can implement multiple interfaces, but it can only extend from at most one abstract class. So what's the answer? D. What's wrong with A and B? Can you instantiate either one? No. An interface is just a pure abstract class. So if you can't instantiate an abstract class, then you certainly can't instantiate an interface. An abstract class must implement an interface? No, it doesn't have to. It can, but you don't have to design it that way. A method in a subclass can be overridden, right? That's why we've got those override annotations sometimes that are generated by Eclipse. A method in a subclass can be overridden, so obviously we're talking about inheritance here, to change how a subclass behaves. Which method is invoked is determined by what mechanism. So remember back to the example that we had of a bird and then an ostrich and a robin. An ostrich is overridden its move method to walk or run, and a robin flies. How does it know when to call the walk method or the fly method? By using an intermediate join table. That's a database concept that doesn't make any sense. There's always like a red herring or an obvious no answer. By the compiler using static dispatch. So if it's a compiler using static dispatch, it would be done at compile time. Does that sound right? Yeah? No? Yes? I don't know yet. Yawn. At runtime using dynamic dispatch using a virtual table. Okay. Or by overloading the Java virtual machine. That's another obvious what? So is it done by the compiler at static dispatch, or is it done at runtime using a virtual table? So remember the diagram that I gave you, that when you create this thing, it has a virtual table in it with a reference over to the actual function that gets called, right? That it's calling the function that prints out walk, or it's calling the function that prints out fly. And the reason that you need this dynamically at runtime is because you can treat a subclass like a superclass. So you can treat a robin like a bird. So in other words, I can have bird b is equal to whatever, right? And the compiler doesn't know, is that a robin or is that an ostrich at compile time, because it can change at runtime. And so it can't determine that at statically at compile time. It has to be dynamically at runtime. And so using those virtual tables is how that's achieved. So C is the correct answer here. What is static dispatch? That is a thing. What is it, though? You remember? It happens by the compiler at compile time. And I think I've got a question later on here about it. The quintessential example that I give is the absolute value function. There are 4 different absolute value functions, 3 or 4 of them, I forget. One of them that takes a double, an integer, a float, or whatever, a long, right? But they all have the same name. That's function overloading, not overriding, right? And so that is done at compile time. The compiler sees that you're calling this absolute value function and you're passing it an integer. Oh, you meant the one that takes an integer, right? And so it's able to determine that at compile time based on the parameters that you give it. Okay. Let A be a subclass of B. So B up here, A is down here. Which of B's variables does A have access to? The private variables, public variables, protected variables, all of them, or just public and protected? So down here, we're looking at their variables up there. Do I have access to the public variables? Absolutely, everybody does. Right? Do I have access to the private variables? Nope, only the class itself. So the real only question here is, do you have access to protected variables in a subclass? Yes. So B and C is the correct answer. This one I would definitely reword, but we've got a class named check inventory with an abstract method called report error. Right? And we've got 2 subclasses, search inventory and count inventory, that may call this. In the search inventory, it has been overridden to send an error message to the manager. And in the check inventory, it writes an error message to a text file. Okay, so down here in the subclasses, two different behaviors. Suppose that we have an inspect variable instantiated with this line of code, check inventory inspect equals new search inventory. So in other words, we have an instance of search inventory over here. If I invoke its report error message, what happens? Does it send an error message to the manager? It is valid. Oh, which one is false? Sorry. So it sends an error message to the manager. It is valid Java code. So in other words, is it not valid Java code? That's true. It is valid Java code. It writes a message to the text file, or as above is an example of polymorphism. First of all, is this an example of polymorphism? Kind of, yeah. This is why I would reword it. It's polymorphic behavior in that it's subtype polymorphism, it's inheritance polymorphism. Remember, they're kind of the yin and yang of each other. They work together just like abstraction and encapsulation work together. So the real question is I would reword this to which one of the following is true. Let's go ahead and get rid of B and D here. What does it do? If it's a search inventory, it will send an error message to the manager. So it sends an error message to the manager. This is what we were looking for. That's the one that's false. This is the one that's true. And ignore the other two. Okay. All right. Say that you have the following line of Java code: list of strings, product descriptions equals new array list of strings. Which of the following is true? Adding a non-string type to product descriptions will result in a runtime exception. The upcasting of treating an array list like a list indicates that product descriptions is a list now and not an array list. Is it no longer an array list? That's not right. It's still an array list. We're just treating it as its interface type here. Adding a non-string type to product descriptions will result in a compile time error. So similar to A and C are similar, but is it a runtime error or is it a compiler error? The code is invalid. A list can't contain string types. That's false. So which is it? C. Is it it's a compile time error, right? The compiler will be able to catch this. This is the exact purpose. This is the entire purpose of using parameterized polymorphism. That you can do runtime checks instead of just compile time checks instead of runtime checks. Okay. Class constructor method is used to initialize an object at the time of creation. Suppose that the only constructor explicitly defined in a class is a non-default constructor, that is a constructor that takes some parameters. Which of the following is true? The default constructor provided by the compiler can still be used. Is that true? If the moment that you define your own constructor, what happens to the default constructor? It goes away, right? Lab 4. So this is not true. You can redefine it though. You can always put it back in explicitly, and then you can have a no argument constructor. Any instances created from the class must be initialized with appropriate parameters. Well, yeah. If you created a constructor that takes 3 strings, you have to provide 3 strings. Right? A class can only have one constructor, either defined by the programmer or as a default. Is that true? No, you can have as many constructors as you want. A class will never need its own constructor since it always calls its superclass's constructor. You need a constructor. Right? So, like I said, what was it? B is the correct answer. Okay. When a value of static method is used from the string class, of which there are many versions, so just like absolute value, here's the static dispatch question I was talking about earlier. There are 3 or 4 different value of methods in the string class. You can give it an integer, and then it'll parse that integer. It'll give you the value of that integer, or it'll convert that integer to a string. I think you can give it an integer and a base, and you can convert it to a hexadecimal string, or a binary string, or octal string if you want to. And so there are a couple of versions of this value of function method. How is it determined which method is actually executed? Like absolute value. There are 4 different versions. How does it determine that the integer one or the double one or the float one is called? An explicit flag must be passed by the programmer to indicate which method is called. Nope. A compiler is able to deduce at compile time which method to call based on the argument list. That was called static dispatch. And so that's the one that's correct. The first method found satisfying the method name is the one that's called. So it just searches around and, oh, this is good. This is good enough. No. This can only be determined at runtime and may result in runtime errors. No. That's dynamic dispatch and virtual tables inheritance. This is polymorphism done at compile time, static dispatch. Okay. Assume that you have a base class called book and that you've got two subclasses, book and or mystery and fiction. Which of the following is true? Casting an instance of mystery as fiction, right? So I've got book up here, mystery and fiction. Can I cast a mystery as fiction? Is that safe? No. What kind of coercion is that? You remember? Invariant, right? An invariant. So you can't make a robin into an ostrich. Casting an instance of fiction as an instance of book, or sorry, fiction as book, right? So upcasting basically is safe. Is that safe? Yeah, always. What is that called? Do you remember that one? It's always safe to go covariant, right? Casting an instance of book as an instance of mystery is safe. Not necessarily. Sometimes it's safe, but other times it's not. Therefore, we call that, what's the, so we said covariant, invariant, what is it to downcast? Contravariant, right? Casting between any combination will fail. No, of course not. So casting an instance of fiction as a book is safe, always safe, because it follows an is a relationship. Suppose you're required to upgrade a software system for an accounting firm. This is another convoluted one that I would reword. But currently there's a corporate customer and accounts payable. Corporate customer owns a collection of asset instances. When you see the keyword owns here, what are you talking about with respect to OOP? Composition, I heard it, right? Composition, right? If accounts payable has the method public double get total assets, which computes the total asset value of the corporate customer, does this indicate a faulty design? So let's ignore the actual question here and let's do it, redo it in context of your project. If you want to compute the total, the total value of all assets, if you own 10 assets and you want to sum them all up, the value of all of them up and report that, where does that behavior belong? Yeah. In the portfolio class, right? If you want to compute the value of one asset, say one stock asset, where does that behavior belong? And which asset class too? In the stock class. If you want to compute the value of a deposit account, where does that behavior belong? In the deposit class, right? Should you be forced to provide outside information to those methods in order to get it computed? No, it should be completely contained, encapsulated in that class. Any deviation from that design is either breaking encapsulation or breaking inheritance. So that's what this question was getting at, and it definitely needs to be reworked. All right. All right. If you want to compute the total of all portfolios, the value of all portfolios managed by your company, where does that behavior belong? Portfolio reports. Exactly. Right. Or you could make another class. You know, my personal ideal design would be just your main only has 3 lines of code, right? You create this class and then you call it, and that's your 2 lines of code or something, and then it runs, and a separate class runs the report. By the way, I don't think that we took off points for it, but suppose that you wanted to generate a summary report of a portfolio. Where does that belong? So a summary report being, here's the customer, here's a list of all the assets and their risks and the totals, and then here's a grand total of all this stuff. Creating that string, that one string report, sorry, not summary report, detail report of one portfolio. Where does that belong? Ideally. No, we didn't take off for it if you didn't do that, but we saw a lot of solutions that had this big chunk of code that did it in a loop. Where would you put it in the portfolio class? Two-string method, right? That's the perfect application of a two-string method. Each one of those line items, here's an asset, here's its risk, here's its whatever. Where would you put that? In the two-string method of the asset class, right? Reorganizing your code. Think about that for your next iteration. Again, I don't think that we didn't take off explicitly for that. We were mostly focusing on the inheritance and making sure that that was correct. But seeing big giant code in portfolio report, that should have set off some alarm bells, right? This is becoming a god class. Where else should this stuff belong, right? Suppose that we designed a student class that owned an array instance of an exam class. So there's the keyword again, owned or owns. What are we talking about here? Inheritance, composition, abstraction, or polymorphism? Composition, right? Which of the following is true about the final keyword? Right? When used with a method, subclasses cannot override the method. The final keyword can only be used with variables. When used with a class, the class cannot be instantiated. When used at the end of a block of code, that code is executed regardless of any thrown exceptions. So there are three uses of the final keyword. When used with a variable, what does it mean? Yeah, it makes it into a constant. It has a similar meaning when used with a method, which is what this is asking about. When used with a method, that means that subclasses cannot override that method. It makes it a final method. It makes it, I don't know if we talked about virtual methods and non-virtual methods, but it makes it into a non-virtual method. You can't override it in the subclass, right? More importantly, when it's used with a class, we did talk about that explicitly, you can make a class final, in which case you can't extend that class. You can't make a subclass of it. Why would you ever want to do that? What was the example I gave, I think? Like, yeah.
Was it the cat dog example?
That's multiple inheritance, so that's the diamond problem. What about integers? Do you want to subclass the integer class and change its behavior so that plus is now a plus b is now some random number, right? It doesn't make any sense. The integer class, all the built-in types, the string class, all those types are made final so that you can't create a subclass of it and change the behavior because they all have very well-defined and expected behavior. Those classes are final. That's the final word. We don't want anybody overriding that word, right? If you want to put it that way. The final word can only be used with variables. No, that's not true. When used with the class cannot be instantiated. What keyword are we talking about there? Abstract, right? When used at the end of a block of code, that code is executed regardless of any thrown exceptions. There is something like that. It's not final, but it is finally. Right? So try, catch, finally. We'll retread that, or we'll really cover it when we talk about JDBC next week, Java Database Connectivity API. Right? Which of the following best describes OOP concept of polymorphism? That has nothing to do with this code. That's the next question. Hiding specific implementation details from the client. So hiding the details, what does that sound like?
Fraud.
What? Fraud? So how does the square root function work again?
We don't care.
Who cares? Why don't we care? Because we're hiding the details from you. We don't care. Right? That's procedural abstraction. Hiding specific implementation details like how is a date time represented? Is it one number from an epoch? Is it three numbers, month, day, and year? Or is it something else entirely, right? Is it a string, right? We don't care. Hiding those implementation details means that we don't have to worry about that. You encapsulate it in the class, abstract it away. Declaring a class that owns another class as a member. What does that sound like? Owns, again, composition. None of these are polymorphism yet. Treating instances as different types at different points in the program. That's polymorphism. Casting a subclass to reference as its superclass. That's kind of inheritance, but also it's grammatically incorrect, so it must be incorrect. All right, refer to the code up here. We have an abstract animal that has an abstract method called speak. We have a dog that extends animal, and it overrides that method to bark, and a cat overrides it to meow. Refer to the code. We say that we have the following classes. Animal A is equal to new dog, so A is going to be a dog. Animal B is equal to new animal. Does that sound any alarm bells off immediately? It's an abstract class. Can you instantiate it? No. So the first declaration is invalid. A dog cannot be treated like an animal. Of course they can. They are animals. Second declaration is invalid since you cannot instantiate an abstract class. That's exactly what I just said, what we just observed. The second declaration is valid since the types match. No. The first declaration is valid but unsafe as it represents an invariant relationship. No, it doesn't. The dog is an animal. It's in that hierarchy. That looks familiar? We'll be coming back to that. Actually, right here. Consider the database in Figure 2. The video game database consists of 4 tables. Assume that all fields are there and included when created. Which of the following most likely describes the order in which the tables must have been created? So let's just derive that immediately. Can a game exist without a publisher? No. Can a publisher exist without a game? So which one needs to be created first? Publisher. Can a game exist without a platform and vice versa? Yeah. But can an availability record exist without a game and or exist without a platform? No. So what has to be created first? Publisher. What has to be created last? Availability, and then either one of these in either order. So the publisher table was created first, then platform, then game, then availability. That would be the most correct answer there. Otherwise, the game was created first, then availability. No, you can't create the game first because you need a publisher. Question is moot. The order of tables are created doesn't matter. No, it certainly does. The availability table was created first. No, you have to create the game and the platform table before you can create the availability table. Which of the following statements about basic database functionality is false? SQL provides functionality to retrieve records with select statements. That's true. SQL provides functionality to add new records with the update statement. That's false. How do you add new records? Insert. SQL provides functionality to delete records with delete. Yep. None of the above are false, which is false. So they're B and D technically, but that's why you shouldn't ask about false questions with none of the above, because then it's the sentence that this sentence is a lie, right? Well, if it's true, then it's a lie, so it can't be true. If it's false, then it's not a lie, so it must be true, so it's false, right? It's the liar's paradox. Right? What is the difference between? By the way, if you, that's not just a toy example. That underlies a revolution in 20th century mathematics. Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It's a formalization of the liar's paradox, that if you have a system of axioms that can a system of axioms cannot prove its own consistency and be consistent at the same time. So you can't. It shows a fundamental flaw in all of mathematics, that there are certain things that that are called independent, that you can be proven true. It can be proven false. It depends on the axioms that you start with. And so there's trippy stuff that can happen. It's all meta-mathematics, right? So it's not just a fun toy example that you can throw around at parties. It's actually something that you can do some advanced mathematics with. What is the difference between a join and a left join in SQL? Join creates new records. Is that true? No. A join preserves records that are in one table but not the other, or a left join preserves records in one table but not the other. See, They're the same? No, that's not right. Min and max, come on. There we go. Okay. Why is this not? There we go. Min and max and average are examples of SQL queries that return a result set. Yeah, technically they are, but that's why we say what's the most correct here. SQL aggregate functions. Yep, that's the most correct. They are aggregate functions. Do they require a group by clause? No. You can run an aggregate on just one table. It requires a join clause? No, you can run it on one table. Right? There's another database. It's a person and employee database here. One person can have many different employee records. So they had one job and then they quit and they had another job, or maybe they have two jobs at the same time, or they're never employed, and so that they are a person, but they don't have any employment records at all. Say that we wanted to insert a new employee into the database in figure 3, we would need to do what first? Insert a record into the employee table first, then the person first, then employee. Formulate a compound insert query to insert into both tables simultaneously. Whenever I make questions like this, there have always been a joke like, haha, you can't do a compound insert statement. I'm sure that that's now been a feature that's added somewhere that you know, somebody, I gotcha, you can do that now. We've extended SQL to do something like this. Or as defined, this operation is not possible. So which one do you need to do first? Can a person first, because you need a person ID over here for the foreign key. Again, say, oh, this is the video game database one. Say that we wanted to know how many platforms each game has been released on. Which query would return a complete list of all games along with a count of how many different platforms that they've been released on? I'll start from the bottom. Is this going to do it? No. Counting all platforms, that's just going to return the number of records in the platform table. So what about these three? It looks like that the select statement is the same. Here we do on A and B we do a left join. On C we just do a regular join. Is a regular join going to give you a complete list of all games? Nope. The ones that are not available on any system will not be there. Between A and B, which one is more correct? What's the only difference there?
Group by.
Group by. Do we need a group by clause or not? Yep. And the example I used this morning was Animal Crossings because it's coming out soon, right? But I was thinking of getting it for my kids. Do you need to read in order to play Animal Crossings? No? Okay. Then I'll go ahead and get it. I've got a 4-year-old that might enjoy it. But anyway, if you have Animal Crossings available on Wii and DS and the Switch, right? 3 different systems. And so we've got the same game here, 3 different systems. We want to collapse this down and count how many are over here, right? So that we only have one record for Animal Crossings, and then this has been collapsed, or what do we call that? Data, we take it from 3 dimensions and put it down onto 2 dimensions. Called it, oh no. It's what is this doing up here? It's flattening it, it's projecting it, right? That's data projection. And so we definitely need a group by clause here. Otherwise, we are just going to get like one number for every single record, the count of the number of records that come back. Right? Which of the following is most true about the following query? Delete last name from person. Remember that it's this one. So can you delete a column? No, delete is for records. So it's not valid SQL. The query deletes the last name column from the person table. That's not how you do it. You can do that. You can do alter table drop column, but we're not doing that in this class. The query deletes all records in the person table. If it was delete from person and then that's it, that would delete all the records. Hopefully you're in safe mode and it would prevent you from doing that. But if you're not in safe mode, like say on the command line, then it's going to go ahead and do it for you. The query is valid SQL but has no effect. No, it's not valid SQL. Which of the following statements about the table in figure 3, which was the employee table, is most accurate? So one to many or many to one, what's the relationship there? So from the person table to the employee, there is a one to many. From the employee table back to the person table, from that perspective, there's a many to one. Right? And whichever one corresponds to that. You have to read it. Which of the following statements about primary keys is false? Primary key is a unique identifier for each record in a table. That's true. Primary keys in separate tables cannot have the same value. That's false. You can have primary key 1, 2, 3 over here and primary key 1, 2, 3 over here. They just need to be unique to that table. The primary key can consist of more than one column. That is true. You can make primary keys like that. I do not recommend it. If you want compound keys, or composite keys, that's perfectly fine. For example, what was the database that we built in here? Books or films? Films. We said that Carrie Fisher could not star in Star Wars twice. So we put a key on the combination of those two columns, a unique key. A primary key can either be auto-generated by the database or defined by the designer. Yeah, you can omit the auto increment and then do your own key management if you really want to. Again, not something I would recommend. Which of the following would not be considered a best practice when dealing with SQL and database connectivity? This is because last year we must have covered JDBC before the midterm. This is something that comes next week. If you want to know the answer, I believe, resources, result sets, prepared statements, connections should be released as soon as they are done being processed. Yes, that's good practice. Prepared statements should always be used to ensure safe SQL statements. That is also true. If you don't do that, you have something called an SQL injection attack. And you can execute arbitrary SQL statements to an unprotected database. Defining forward keys should be avoided so that the types of queries won't be restricted. No, that doesn't make any sense. That's a bad practice. Good practice, bad practice, good practice. Use of the star operator should be limited to protect code against changes in the underlying data model. Absolutely. When you're in MySQL Workbench, using the star operator is completely fine. But when you start programmatically connecting to your database with Java code, never use the star operator. Be more intentional, and we'll see why later on. But you will not have a question like that because we have not covered JDBC yet. Last question, and we just did this in 35, 40 minutes. Consider the database in figure 3. This is the salary database. Suppose the database is populated with various employees, each with respective positions and salaries. Suppose that we need to generate a report that lists each employee name along with their salaries. Which query would accomplish that? So I'm obviously going to need to be doing a join here. So they all differ slightly in the select here. This one is first name, last name, salary, first name, last name, salary, first name, last name, and then a sum of all salaries. Okay. From person, join employee on person ID. This one, unfortunately, I think would work because it's what's called a natural join. You don't have to say this equals that. Some databases do support this, I believe. A natural join is just simply, I'll join these two tables together based on the column names. And as long as table A and table B both have the same person ID name, it'll work. It's not something that you want to rely on, though, because some databases don't support natural joins. So this is, nope. So which one? What's the difference between B and C here? E dot. Right? Which one is better if you've aliased it? C. Right? So the difference between those. Some but no group by clause. So what would that give you? It would give you everybody's unique names and then one big giant number of the sum of all salaries in the entire database. That's not what you want. You want their salary. Right? So an aggregate across two tables without a group by clause may not necessarily make sense. Okay, and there we go. So C by process of elimination. We have plenty of time left over. So what I did in the other section was All right, this is a nice little database, two table database. In fact, I can tell you where I got this. I believe it was from somebody I worked with a long time ago. He had a consulting company. He and his friend, and they had several employees. And so he gave this. I said, "Well, what do you do to hire your employees?" Because they were working as a consultant where I was working, and they said, "Well, we just give them this test." And what's the test? Well, it's these two tables: person and employee. And then these two simple tables, you can pretty much ask anything that you want with SQL. They would ask him, how would you have created these tables? Is this well designed? How would you find the highest paid employee in the company, right? Those are good interview questions. Unlike something like FizzBuzz, which is kind of a weeder. This can get into a little bit of more of a design question of how would you extend this so that I don't know, how would you extend this? I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but let's go ahead and use this, and let's go ahead and go through some of those interview questions that I remember from more than 10 years ago. All right. First of all, how would you have created these tables? Let me give myself some more room over here. All right, which one needs to be created first if we're going to create them? Person, okay. Create table, if exists, if you want to do that. Person. Curly brackets? Nope. Parentheses. What ends it? Semicolon, okay. Create table person, person ID. It's an, what type is it? Int. What else can you tell about it from the ER diagram there? It's a primary key, not null, auto increment. Now you're not going to be able to tell that not null and auto increment just from the ER diagram, but that's usual. Semicolon, comma, first name, and it is a varchar 255. Now, I didn't mention it when we looked at ER diagrams at the very beginning, but the filled in diamond indicates that it's not null. If it were a non-filled in diamond, then it would indicate that it's allowable, it's nullable. It's allowed to be null. So not null. Last name, not null. There we go. Good. The other one is create table employee. What else do you need? What do you need first? An employee ID. Int, not primary key, auto increment, not null, blah, blah, blah. Right. Person ID, which is of type int or integer. And it's not allowed to be null because it's filled in, but also because that's our foreign key there. That's what's making the connection from this table over to the person table. Then title, varchar 255, not null because it's filled in. Salary, float. There we go. Is that all? That creates the two tables, but it doesn't bring them together. How do we bring them together? Foreign key, and the person ID is the foreign key. Generally, you want to put that in parentheses. And it references the person table and the person ID in that person table. And there. We've recreated these two databases. I'm going to have to remember what we did. What kind of queries would you want to run on this? There we go. I can look at what queries I thought of this morning. What queries would you run? You're an interviewer. You're trying to decide whether or not you want to hire this person or work with this person. That's one of the nice things about, well, it's not one of the nice things about some classes in college. You get to choose who to work with, right? In the real world, unless you're a manager, you don't get to choose who to work with. Later on, when you take senior design, you don't get to choose who to work with, or whom to work with, excuse me. Right? The nice thing about, say, this class is that you get to choose, and you can. And nobody's done it in this section, but there have been several people that have learned how to break up a partnership and when to break up a partnership. So. And also learning, you know, your friend is not necessarily a good person to work with, right? You know, to separate your worlds. All right, so tell me, what questions would you ask if you were a hiring manager? How much is our entire payroll? How would you find that out? Select A. Sum of all of his salaries from employee. There's an example of an aggregate where you don't have to go to more than one table. You don't need a group by clause because all you're doing is taking all those column values and summing them all up. Right? It's just like one Excel worksheet. You sum up this entire column and that's it. Right? You can rename it as total payroll if you want to. Okay. What is the name of the lowest paid employee? So how would you find the lowest salary? Select the minimum salary as min salary if you want from employee. Now how could you use that to find the person with that salary? Select let's say first name, last name, there we get camel case, from person P. But if I'm going to search for them by their salary, I need to go then to the salary table. So join that's a good made up word there. Employee E on P dot person ID is equal to E dot person ID, where their salary, E dot salary, is equal to, and then I can put this into a nested query. Now, first of all, is that guaranteed to only give me one employee? If somebody's making only $500 a year, and there are two people that are only making $500 a year, and that's the lowest paid employee, well, we could have several of them, right? I chose to do a join. Am I going to run into any problems there? What about a left join? Maybe I should have done a left join instead. So if it's a person without an employee record, are they going to have a salary? No. So in fact, we want a join in this case because if we did a left join and treated the salary as a number, null would probably get casted to 0, and then that would be the lowest salary, right? Even though maybe there's no salary of 0. Okay, so we do want to join in this case, a regular old join. Come on, think of something interesting. No? For each person, oh, yeah, okay. For each person, how many employee positions have they had or do they have? Right. So because there's a one-to-many relationship here, one person could have 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 0 jobs. So let's go ahead and select just their last name. Of course, you can select everything if you really want to. And then what as num positions? What kind of an aggregate are you going to want here? You want to sum up their positions? Or if Joe Smith has a CEO job, a CLO job, and is also the janitor, they have 3 positions. Do I want to sum them up, or do I want to say 1, 2, 3? I want to count them. Count everything. as num positions from person P left join. Why do I want to do a left join here? If they have no positions, then I want to include them in the report. They'll end up being 0. Right? Left join employee E on P dot person ID is equal to E dot person ID. Right? There. Is that enough? Okay. Group by what? E dot person ID? Right. Why did I say E dot person ID? I could have done P dot person ID. But now this raises the question, what are you actually wanting to count then? If I did this, anybody with a position of, or no position at all, would still have a record. It would have first name, last name, but everything over here that they joined to would be null because I did a left join. Do I want to count those? Nope. What do I want to count? I only want to count it if it's non-null. And so what would be non-null? E dot person ID. You could have gone P dot person ID or whatever. Or E dot employee ID. Employee ID. That's what, sorry, it should be employee ID. Because if it was person ID, of course, that would be, if it was E dot person ID, then that would be all right. But this is even more right. The primary key in the employee table. Right. There. Okay. For each person, what is their total pay? So kind of like this. In fact, exactly like this, except for instead of counting the number of records, what do you want to do? You want to sum up their salary as total pay. There. And as long as you're grouping them by the person ID, then Joe Smith in his 3 positions here get collapsed down, get projected down, and the sum of those 3 is taken. Okay. All right. Good. Any more? That's all I had from this morning. Let me quit. Oh, what about find all employees, right? I.e., they have to have a job whose name begins with a B. I'm searching for myself. So select everything from person where last name begins with B. How do I do that? Like B %. Right? Is that guaranteed that they have a job though? Yeah.
You do employees left join person.
Okay. Left join. Oh, you want to
Employees
start
left.
from the employees?
Well,
Oh, that's a good question. So if you start at employee, do you have to do a left join? No, because it's guaranteed that that person will exist. Otherwise, this record would not have existed anyway.
Right.
So if you start at employee and go to person, a left join and a regular join are exactly the same result.
Okay, but you do have to join to get that.
Yeah, you're going to have to join. And since I'm starting at the person, I'll go left join to employee E on E dot person ID is equal to P dot person ID. Alias that. Where last name, oh, now the left join. Do I want to do a left join in this case? Nope. Just a regular join so that I dismiss all those records where they don't have a job. What else? Generate a report where you reduce, or no, let's be nice about it. Give everyone a 10% pay raise. How would you do it? Let's go ahead and get that report of everybody's salary. No, okay. We'll just do it with this. Well, if they don't have any a salary to begin with, we can't give them a 10% raise, so we'll just do a regular join. I'll do P dot last name, and of course you can do first name as well if you want to. E dot salary. What should I do to the salary to give them a 10% pay increase? 1.1, multiply it by 1.1 as new salary, right? Something like that. Feels good to give everybody a pay increase, right? What about a pay decrease? There you go. All right. Yep. Austerity. There you go. What else could you do? Trying to think of your assignment right now. Is there anything relevant from your assignment? I think one of the bonus things for your next phase is to do fraud detection, but that's like for example, maybe you don't want somebody both managing and being the beneficiary of a portfolio because for whatever, making sure that you don't have a conflict of interest, or finding a value. No. Oh, duplicates, for example. In this one you have, or in this class section for honors credit, you have to ensure that one asset cannot be on the portfolio more than once. What I mean by that is Google stock, 50 shares, 100 shares on the same portfolio. There should only be one record with 150 shares, right? Deposit account of the same type, and $1,000 in one, $500 in the other. There should be one deposit account of that type with $1,500 in it. So how could you find that? Well, how could you prevent that? By putting a constraint on it, of course. In this case, how could we find it? Not duplicates. Here, let's do something similar though. Select or find all possible job titles. Right? So select title from employee ID. Employee, sorry, just that. Now, if there are two janitors, or janitor, let's see, what DBA level 1, DBA level 2, DBA. Say that there are 3 DBA level 3s, right? How many entries are they going to have in this result set here? If there are 3 of them, there'll be 3. So how do we reduce that to only get unique titles? Unique. Unique, that is a key word, but that's for unique keys when you create a table. What's the key word to only get the unique values? Distinct title from employee. Okay. And also I want them in alphabetic order. Order by title. But reverse order. Desk. Okay. The default is ascending, so it'll be A's to Z's, right? And then if you wanted to, you could like 2 lower, right? Something like this. That's going to be database dependent. 2 lower or something like that. I'm not going to go that far because I'm not sure what it is on MariaDB. All right. Any questions? No? A million questions that you could ask from just 2 tables in a database. That's why it was a really good interview question and why I stole his idea. All right. So again, Thursday, you'll have the whole time. Bring a number 2. The only things that you need to bring are a number 2 pencil. I will provide the bubble sheets. Don't worry. You should bring your computer so that because the limited number of physical copies. Otherwise, I'll just give you a URL to go to. Okay. All right. Good luck. I have Honda. Let's see, and Agarwal for write-ups here.